I am in Columbia, Missouri today at the leadership retreat for the Associated Students of the University of Missouri. But I'm so happy to be joining you today to talk about free speech in particular. This is really an important topic that needs to be discussed, especially as we begin our return back to campus en masse, if you will. And so as I present today, I ask that you please just think about free speech, not just in terms of what you see in regards to activity in the quad, but also as we think about campus events and also classroom spaces, free speech, it touches every part of our campus. And so I have a presentation that I'd love to show you, and I can't figure out how to get to it, Michaela. Okay, sorry, there we go. Okay, so as we think about free speech, it's more than ever, colleges and universities have an obligation to protect free speech. As you can see, just a few examples, there's lots of litigation and grievances as it relates to free speech, not being protected, and universities, maybe in certain cases, not ensuring that free speech was available to members of that campus community. And so at our campus, we very much believe in the right to free expression and have a policy that speaks to that. I'm sorry, I'm trying to navigate. There we go. So as we think about free speech, there are many considerations as it relates to the law behind it. So you have, of course, the First Amendment rights, where this is enshrined in the US Constitution, but we also have free speech protected within the Missouri State Constitution. Additionally, in 2015, the state of Missouri adopted the Campus Free Expression Senate Bill 93. And this act, which I'll talk about more so later in the presentation, this is the act that prohibited free speech zones, which is what we had before at the university. And so the free speech zone at UMSL prior to this law being adopted was the Wayne Good statute. That's where individuals could go to engage in free speech activity. But with the adoption of the Campus Free Expression Act, outdoor spaces of all public institutions are considered to be spaces where free speech can happen spontaneously without reservations being required. Whenever we fail to adhere to the Campus Free Expression Act or Missouri State Constitution or the US Constitution, then of course, we and any other institution that's engaging in that and prohibiting that protected behavior is open to lawsuits, injunctions, et cetera. And so again, this is really important that we remain mindful of the obligations we have as a university in this space. So in 2017, the University of Missouri system adopted language in regards to its commitment to free expression. And so the link is here where you can actually read more, but I do have some snippets of this. And so again, this is just us reiterating our commitment to free expression, understanding that though expression of certain types may not be popular, it is a protected opportunity and right that individuals have on our campuses, and that we will not stop free expression solely because individuals may find it offensive. Instead, what we will do is make sure that it adheres to the law, it adheres to individual rights, but that, at the end of the day, we're not going to censor free speech because it may be unpopular. So as we think about what's protected and then what we can restrict, it's pretty clear. And so I'll go through this in a lot more detail as the presentation goes on, but we operate with the understanding that all expression is protected. And then what we do is work backwards to say, okay, if it needs to be restricted, on what grounds would we restrict it? And we have to make sure that we apply a fair and consistent standard in that regard. And so examples of which we can potentially restrict free expression would be if it's a true threat. So if there's a threat that's being communicated, of course, that does not fall under protected speech. If it violates the law, and so you would see this through harassment on a protected basis, if it's disruptive to university activities or operations, or if it violates reasonable standards for time, place, and manner, which universities are allowed to adopt. But again, it has to be objectively reasonable and also consistently applied regardless of what the viewpoint is or political leanings, that it has to be viewpoint neutral. Okay, so quite commonly I hear from students concerns as it relates to hate speech. And it's really important to note that hate speech is not a concept and there's no definition for hate speech. And so we are not in a position where at the university where we can take action based solely off of hate speech. That would be speech that espouses hate that individuals may find offensive. Unfortunately, there isn't the space for us to do anything in that regard, even though we understand that there could be concerns that arise from speech that is considered to be hateful. Hate speech is actually different than a hate crime, which would be something that on its own, the crime itself would be a violation of the law. And then the hate aspect would then be further violation because then you'd be treating someone differently or perpetrating an act against them solely because of, or in large part due to their membership in a protected category, if you will. And so hate speech is different from a hate crime. And so it's really important that, that students understand those two differences that exist there. So often it stops me from moving forward. Okay. So when can hateful speech be restricted? If it violates the law. And so typically, if you're communicating a threat to another person, then of course, that would be something that the university would be in a position to stop that behavior and to, intervene. And, you have a true threat as well. And so when we're looking at what happens in the quad, for instance, there can be concerns with statements that are made, but at the end of the day, ultimately the question that we have to ask and answer is a member of our institution being threatened by these individuals that are coming to the university? Is this just language and behavior that individuals are finding offensive? Because again, there is very much a difference there. And also it has to be objectively considered to be threatening. So this could be which someone has a grimacing look and another person says, well, I find that to be threatening. This has to be objectively threatening in order for the university to potentially intervene and stop that free speech from happening. Also, threats, they more so have to be in the physical vein, if you will, as opposed to emotional. And so it's really important, again, that we have to look at these things and apply a consistent assessment of how we're interpreting those. And so it's not dictated by the content of the statements, but rather the impact that's happening and whether or not it truly does meet that standard for intervening. Okay, so when can hate speech be restricted? So as I shared, severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. Also, does it interfere with the university's educational programs? And so, for instance, amplifying devices, if we see that in the quad, then that's something where my office can intervene, whether it's a member of our community, whether it's a person coming from off campus. If they're using amplifying devices, that's violating our policy, and we would say that disrupts the educational experience of our students. And so as we think about harassment, which would also be of course, prohibited, it has to be directed at individuals. And so, for instance, if you're in a classroom and somebody espouses a statement or a viewpoint that you find to be hateful or offensive, or let's say it happens in the quad, if that's a general statement, then that is seen to be protected. It's viewed as protected speech. If it's directed at you as an individual, then that is different. Then that's where it could be considered harassment. And so just because statements may pertain to you or your community, or let's say that of another student, if it's not specifically directed at them, then typically that is considered to be protected speech and it doesn't actually border on harassment. This is always something that students with any concerns can definitely bring to my attention in student affairs, and we are happy to talk through those concerns with you to figure out if protected speech did in fact cross the line and become harassment. But typically speaking, that bar is seen to be pretty high. And when we think about the quad in particular, the people that tend to visit our campus know how to toe that line, if you will, to make sure that you're aware that they're speaking about you, but without using the exact language, which would actually allow the university to intervene and take appropriate action to stop that harassment. And so it's a fine line, but it is one that we are willing to sit down and talk with students about. And again, my office is in the quad and we're very much observing and trying to ascertain what's going on at any particular time. And we're very much operating from an objective and neutral viewpoint because we're trying to uphold laws and campus policy. All right, so here we get into some examples, which I think are pretty helpful. So what is protected and then what can be restricted when it comes to hate? So nothing prevents carrying a swastika or a Confederate flag around campus or distributing leaflets that may espouse hate. We've unfortunately seen this on our campus. That's considered protected speech, and so that's nothing that the university can stop. However, if those same actions kind of take a different shape, if you will, so for instance, the swastika is now being drawn on, campus property, well, that's vandalism. So then that's a violation of the law. That gives us an ability to intervene. If placing a noose or engaging in some kind of hateful act directed at a specific population of students is also something that the university could take action on because we would see that as harassment. All right, some other examples. Nothing prevents a student from posting racist images or slurs on their social media account. However, if those slurs are directed towards a particular student, then again, that's harassment. It's the same with posts that are made that communicate a true threat, as I said before. That's a violation of the law, so then that speech would no longer be protected at that point. All right, so as we most commonly see, speakers from outside of our campus come into the quad and they espouse different viewpoints, and some of those are directed at certain populations and very much are seen as hateful, offensive comments by a large faction of our campus. That is protected because, again, it's not targeting any one individual person, it's targeting a population or a community. A street preacher on campus decries homosexuality as a sin and uses slurs to describe college women. Unfortunately, this is also quite common. That is considered to be protected speech where the university cannot intervene. The difference would be, again, that individual or direct harassment. That's the game changer in which we actually have the ability to. All right, one concept that's really important to talk about today is that of safe spaces. And so this is definitely something that we hear a lot more about today. And there's nothing wrong with student groups wanting to create safe spaces with individuals with like minds and wanting to talk about important and sensitive topics without concern that there's going to be offensive commentary or non-inclusive language or actions, if you will. However, there are considerations within that safe space concept, if you will. And so nothing stops organizations from engaging and creating these opportunities, but you can't use these safe spaces to censor viewpoints. And so it really comes down to how organizations choose to structure their safe space event. Is it closed or is it open? If it's closed, then you actually have some ability to decide who's invited. If it's an open event in which that you're doing a call out to all students or the campus community, just because someone comes to that event and espouses beliefs that are different than yours, the group doesn't inherently have the right to stop or censor those comments. But instead, you could say that the behavior is disruptive at a certain point if they're monopolizing time, if you will. And so it really comes down to what you're seeing and how the space is, the safe space is created and marketed. That will determine whether or not a student organization has any rights to censor or to consider certain language to be disruptive to the event. All right, so what can and cannot student groups do whenever it comes to safe spaces? So student groups can reserve space and activities and can bar others from disrupting them. Again, that would come down to more so of a closed event, if you will. Inform students at particular office spaces for them to come to and share ideas. We see or share concerns. We see this a lot with Safe Zone or Safe Zone training. There's stickers on different offices letting students in the LGBTQ plus community know that that office is a safe space for them and that they can talk to a person that is understanding of them. And what student groups cannot take over public spaces without a reservation. So for instance, we have to look at what space on campus is reservable. So, if a student group were to take over, let's say the nosh, and say that that's now a safe space and no one else can come, well, that's a reservable space. And so that's definitely not something that student groups can do. And also student groups cannot declare that offensive speech is barred from public spaces on campus. And this goes back to the activity that we see in the quad, unfortunately, more so than we have before. All right, so disruption is one of the examples that I gave before in regards to when the university has the ability to intervene. And so this is something, again, where we have to apply a fair and consistent standard, so it remains viewpoint neutral. And so as we look at disruption, we don't allow anyone to occupy campus buildings, to block access to buildings, block vehicles or foot traffic. If you look at our campus policy as it relates to free speech and free expression, there's a 20-foot rule that you have to remain at least 20 feet away from any exit or entrance of a building if you're standing there, engaging in free speech, whether you're handing out a leaflet or whether you're espousing your belief system, because we need to ensure that there's appropriate access, in and out of buildings. And so, if somebody came within that 20 feet, we would consider that potentially to be disruptive. Interfering with classes, research, and other operations, that gets back to the amplifying devices that I spoke to earlier. All right, just a few more examples here. So disruption actually works in another way too, where if there's disruption that's occurring to individuals that are engaging in protected free speech. So for instance, when we have individuals in the quad espousing their belief system, if there are active attempts to thwart those individuals from engaging in that protected activity, then that's also seen as disruptive. And so that is space in which the university has to take appropriate action. And again, that's one of the reasons why I'm in the quad whenever we typically see free speech activity occurring there, is to ensure that all rights are protected, whether it's a member of our campus community or a person coming to campus to engage in free speech. All right, just a few examples of disruption. So we can, of course, allow and facilitate alternative counter events. You see this a lot, especially at a campus like Mizzou, when they have controversial speakers come, a student group that has a belief system that's counter to that controversial speaker, they can host different events that provide that counterbalance, if you will. So it's not disrupting the other event. Instead, it's just giving an alternative option for students to engage and maybe affirm their belief system, as opposed to, the other event that would actually be attempting to, attack their belief system, if you will. Express views. So the university, of course, can say that even though we believe in the right to free expression, it doesn't mean that the action or the beliefs or they're endorsed, supported, or condoned by the university, but rather we protect that right to engage in that free expression. What we can't do as it relates to disruption is encourage or tolerate substantial disruption by the speaker. We've seen this at DePaul University, for instance. There was a controversial speaker and a group organized and stormed into that event, went on stage. There was an assault, I believe, of the controversial speaker. They stopped the event from occurring. That would actually, at the university, result in disciplinary action for those students, because they've disrupted an event that was occurring on campus. And so, of course, that'd be a violation of policy. And also, the university doesn't have the ability to, in most cases, to stop invited speakers from coming to campus, because we know that they're going to be controversial. So for instance, if Westboro Baptist Church wanted to hold an event on campus, they could. However, if we received, let's say, a bomb threat because the Westboro Baptist Church was planning to host an event on campus, well, then, of course, we have to then assess whether or not it's worth it and whether or not the risk is so high that we actually have to stop it from occurring. That's really the only option we have to stop someone that might be seen as controversial from coming to the campus. And those are very limited cases in which that could actually occur. All right, we're kind of closing or coming to the end. So time, place, and manner. So this is a kind of a loose or fluid concept, if you will, but basically the university has the right to determine time, place, and manner of action that's occurring on campus in regards to free speech. But again, it has to be viewpoint neutral. So if we couldn't say that Planned Parenthood could chalk on the in the quad, but yet the Westboro Baptist Church cannot. So instead, what we have to do is basically say no chalking is allowed or all chalking is allowed. And so that's, again, falling under time, place, and manner. Campus Free Expression Act, as I talked about, all outdoor areas of the campus are open to any individual spontaneously coming and engaging in free speech. This is different than if that same space is reserved. So for instance, you can reserve space in the quad. If that space is reserved, then those individuals would not be able to engage in free speech in that particular space, but they could go to another one on campus. And I'll say this too, with the Campus Free Expression Act, the law is very clear that there will be financial penalties as well as additional action taken by the state should a university fail to adhere to the law. And so it's really important that we adhere to that law, even if the university doesn't support or endorse the language that's being espoused or the beliefs that are being espoused. So as I said, we can no longer limit free expression to free speech zones. That's the major underpinning, if you will, of the Campus Free Expression Act. We allow individuals to come and collect signatures and pass out leaflets. I believe there was someone on campus, I believe it was our first or second day of classes, passing out information in the quad, which is their right to do. We also, I already spoke to that in terms of the reservable space. Again, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the rules that we're enforcing are consistent and regardless of the viewpoint that is being expressed. So as I said, amplifying devices are not considered to be appropriate within our time, place, and manner provision. And so we don't allow amplifying devices. As I said, we don't allow individuals to block exits or entrances of the campus. Posting on bulletin boards, that's not something that we allow either. And then no camping. So you can't take over the quad, but rather you can come under the Campus Free Expression Act and engage in free speech, but that doesn't mean that you can choose to pitch a tent, stay in the quad, and then espouse your beliefs for a week straight. So that is an overview of campus free expression, kind of in a nutshell. Are there any questions that any of you have?
Hi, DeAndre. Thanks for being here today. Yeah. We did have a question in the Q&A that I wanted to pose to you. It said, so if a guest speaker made statements about Black people being subhuman, would that be accepted? Would the university at least address it?
Okay, so there's two parts to that answer. So would we allow that event to that speaker to come to campus? Yes, we would, because we have to. That one, it's under the law, but then also our commitment to free expression. Would the university speak to that event or that speaker? Quite possibly. So the university, of course, we have our commitments to diversity and inclusion, and that is not a position that the university would ever condone or support. However, we have to support and allow for that free speech to occur on campus. And so, yes, we would allow that speaker to come to campus, but would the university condone their beliefs and the language that they're espousing? No, we would not.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, DeAndre, for being here and for giving us all of that great information. If there's not any more questions in the Q&A, we will move on to student org updates and some changes that have been going on.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, have a good day at training, DeAndre.
Thanks.
All righty.